So 1977, what did it mean to be a New Yorker? What was the general vibe of in this area at the time? You know, just that year, that summer, that time period. What was going on?
Well, from what I remember at that time, the Yankees were in a pennant race in the summer of '77. Reggie Jackson was playing with the Yankees. Son of Sam was on the loose, and the city was scared. And Elvis Presley died in August of that year. I remember we were in the studio, somebody came in and told us about it. We were all kind of stunned.
In terms of just your career, you as an artist, at that point in time, how did you feel about where you were at, you know, up until that point?
Well, right up till that point, we had been building for many years, since 1970. We started out in the clubs. We started out as an opening act for other headliners. We played small colleges, toured all around the country. There were, 4 albums before that album came out. So we had a following that we were aware of. We had our strong areas and areas that we hadn't really developed yet. And we were pretty much on a gradual build. And very happy with the way things were going. And, you know, I don't recall particularly feeling, oh, this is going to be the breakthrough. We were just happy with the album we were making at the time.
But up to that point, you were generally happy with things like your songs, the productions, the way that the albums, came out sounding, that kind of thing?
Well, I was never really content with the production of the albums prior to The Stranger. The first album was Cold Spring Harbor. That was completely messed up because the mastering process speeded it up. So I sounded like a chipmunk, so that was a disaster. The Piano Man album and the Street Life Serenade album were done with session players. And I was not happy with the session players. They were all good musicians, but there was no organic feel to them because they were all just put together in the studio. And I kind of wanted a rougher approach to things. Turnstiles, which was just prior to The Stranger, started out with a couple of different producers who just didn't work out, and I ended up producing it myself. And I'm not a technical expert at producing albums. I just know what I'm looking for, but I don't always know how to get it. So by the time we did The Stranger, I was very, very happy that we had chosen Phil Ramone as the producer because he had years and years of engineering expertise as far as recording, and he knew how to get what it was I was looking for. Plus he liked the band, and that was my road band. Because prior to that, like I said, it had been session men. Turnstiles was the guys who were with me on the road, but I didn't know how to capture what I was looking for. So it all kind of came together.
Well, let's talk about the band for a second. Were the guys that were in your band, were those particular group of people key to your sound, the Billy Joel sound at the time?
I think the band at the time that I was working with was based on a rhythm section. We didn't really have a continuous guitar player over the years. We went through a half a dozen guitar players. And even when we did the Stranger album, we didn't have a dedicated guitar player. We had a rhythm section. Liberty DeVito on the drums, Doug Stegmeyer on the bass, and myself on the piano constituted the rhythm section. The guitar players on that album were mostly Hiram Bullock, Steve Kahn, people like that, who were studio musicians. But they helped us flesh it out. But we had a lot of mileage under us as a rhythm section. So yes, I think that contributed to the organic nature of what the album came out like.
So did you consider it to be a band? Were you guys like a band?
Yeah, we felt like a band. We felt like a band. I happened to be the keyboard player and the lead singer and the guy who writes. But other than that, we thought of ourselves as a unit. Yeah.
Did you ever consider calling them something else? Like the Silver Bullet Band or the E Street Band, or was it always you and then these other guys?
Well, we tried to come up with names, but all the names we came up with were dopey and stupid, and we settled on a name for the band after the Stranger album. The next album was 52nd Street. We had jackets made up called The Lords of 52nd Street. But at the Stranger album, we hadn't come up with a name for it, no.
Was there an expectation, did you think, from the label and from the media that, you know, going into this record, that this was going to somehow be, you know, important for you, or was there expectations of, you know, hit songs? Like, was your song The Entertainer actually happening to you at that time?
Well, The Entertainer was written partially about my own experience and partially about just observations of the music business in general. But leading up to The Stranger, like I said, I feel like it was a natural build to things. We had been able to headline Carnegie Hall on our own. We had been able to headline some important venues in different major cities. We weren't playing in coliseums yet. We weren't playing in arenas. And now in hindsight, I can say that, yes, it was an important album at the time, because I didn't know this at the time, but had it not been a successful album, the label probably would have dropped me. Because you have to remember, this was my 5th album without having had a major hit. Piano Man was what they call a turntable hit. That's a record that gets played and spun by the DJs because they get requests for it, but it doesn't really sell through. Piano Man wasn't really a big seller. It was just a popular radio record. Going into making The Stranger, I didn't really know that the label was considering dropping me. So I didn't feel like it was make or break at that particular time. I was just kind of going along doing my thing, minding my own business. But now, yeah, in hindsight, I could say, yeah, it was a real important album, because I might have been, you know, flushed otherwise.
So before the record, it's before you even started recording the record, you did this stand of dates at Carnegie Hall. It was 4 nights, I believe.
Right.
Was that a big deal for you as somebody that was a classically trained pianist? I mean, was it like, oh, it's Carnegie Hall, New York City?
Well, there was that element to it, sure, because Carnegie Hall has a reputation of being a terrific music venue for, you know, fine music. But you got to remember, Benny Goodman played there, and Buddy Rich, and Gene Krupa, and I actually saw Led Zeppelin there back in the 60s, and the Beatles played there as well. So it was an important venue, especially in New York City. Carnegie Hall's known worldwide, and when you're going to headline Carnegie Hall, you know it. There's a funny story. There's a restaurant right across the street from Carnegie Hall. It's not there anymore, but it used to be there. Right up until recently, it was called Fontana di Trevi. And I used to like to go to this restaurant. It was kind of like for the opera crowd, the classical music crowd. The Italian food was really good. And I would go to this restaurant, and, you know, they didn't really know who I was, which was fine with me. But sometimes you'd have a hard time getting a table. Well, I went there when the tickets had gone on sale for Carnegie Hall, and the owner of the restaurant sees a line going around the block of people, and there's a poster of me in front of Carnegie Hall. And he was looking at the poster, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Hey, you're that the guy?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Come on in, and we give you a nicer table." And from then on, I was always able to get a good spot. And, you know, people wonder where Scenes from an Italian Restaurant was. Well, that was the place, even though other places have claimed it. You know, it's a combination of places, but I was thinking about that place when I wrote the song.
Were you aware at the time that that Phil Ramone actually was at one of the shows?
Yes, I knew that Phil had attended one of the Carnegie Hall shows.
And how did you guys meet in the first place?
I don't recall exactly how a meeting was set up, but I had expressed a wish to get together with Phil Ramone to produce the Stranger album. I think, actually, even prior to that, I had wanted to work with Phil Ramone. He's a guy whose name you'd see on a lot of records. You weren't really sure what capacity he produced or was involved with the production of a record. But I always saw Phil Ramone involved with records that I like, and the sound I like, the recordings I like. So who is this guy? I want to meet him. And had asked to meet with him and invited him to the show at Carnegie Hall. Just prior to Phil, I had discussed the production of the Stranger album with George Martin. And he produced the Beatles. I mean, he was the ultimate producer at that time, and I still think he's one of the greatest producers ever. But he didn't want to use my band. We talked about it, and he said, look, I'd like to be able to work with you with studio musicians. And I said, I've done this. I've done that. I want to work with my guys. And so it didn't work out with George Martin, which I was disappointed about. But as it turned out, worked out great with Phil. But you have to consider the people up at the record company at Columbia Records at the time. Wait a minute. His wife is managing him. He's fired Jimmy Gershio from the Caribou organization as the producer. Now he's not going to work with George Martin, who was the Beatles producer. And, you can imagine a little red pencil going through my name on the roster. And it was kind of a risky thing to do, but I had to work with somebody who liked the band. And, I stuck by them.
But Phil was having success with the label, also with Paul Simon and Phoebe Snow and people like that.
Right.
So was he sort of a trusted next pick for you, or were they like...
Well, he wasn't, the second guy on the list. He was just the guy who was able to do the project at the time. After I got together with him, I said, yeah, I'd like to work with him. And he expressed a desire to work with the band right off the bat. And that was real attractive to me. He said, I want to work with you guys. You're road dogs. You're not, pure 100% polished musicians, but that's what he liked. He liked the roughness of it. He liked the road aspect of it. He liked the camaraderie and the organic nature of it. And that's what he wanted to work to that. So I said, that's the guy. I want to work with him. I mean, he got it right away.
Was there something that he had done specifically in the past where you're like, man, he's the guy that did that. I gotta,
Well,
I love that.
He's kind of the spur of the moment kind of guy. I mean, he's able to do very professional, polished recordings with, more refined people, but he is also able to improvise, at the moment. He's had to do recording sessions for, live performances when it all had to be done in one shot, and you didn't have a whole lot of pre- and post-production potential. He can go with the moment. And that's a lot of what was going on in the studio. We were just trying things out with no plan at all to it. It was totally disorganized. It was anarchy in a way. And Phil helped to shape it. And he knew when it was a good take. He knew when we should move on. He knew when, okay, stop kidding around, let's get back to work. And also when to encourage us when we were stuck. So he was able to wing it. I didn't know that he'd be that good at it. But it worked out. He became one of the guys in the band, actually. That's why we have him on the album cover. The guy in the back wearing the Yankee shirt is Phil Ramone. And to us, he was just like another guy in the band. He was just as important as the rest of them.
Do you recall at the Carnegie Hall show how much of the material that ended up being in The Stranger you had sort of ready to go, was, already working into the set, that kind of thing?
I don't really remember. I don't remember that.
I think it's Italian Restaurant and Just the Way You Are.
Oh, it was? Was it a completed Italian restaurant or sections of it?
Completed.
Huh. Because I know before we had it completed that there were different sections. One song was called The Ballad of Brenda and Eddie. And that became the middle part of Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. But I don't recall the Carnegie Hall set list right now.
Are there moments from those shows that you particularly remember?
Oh yeah, I remember. There was a no smoking rule that had just been instituted at Carnegie Hall, and they were insistent on it. Okay, you can no longer smoke because people used to be able to smoke at Carnegie Hall. So there's kids up in the balcony, and you can see the people are smoking, and they couldn't stop the show, but what they did was the ushers and the securities were bugged. The kids were smoking, so they turned on the lights above the balconies to show that the kids were smoking and they should put out the cigarettes. So rather than putting out the cigarettes, the kids stood up on the balcony rails and unscrewed the light bulbs. I don't know if that'll show up on the Carnegie Hall film, but I remember just watching people standing up, unscrewing light bulbs because they preferred to smoke in the dark. So there was a little bit of an anarchy going on in Carnegie Hall at the time, which was fun.
That's great. So those shows are the beginning of June, and you start recording the record in, I believe it's September. Do you?
No, we started recording before September.
Oh, really?
We were in the studio in August when Elvis died. So we probably started around the end of July or something.
And do you remember how long that process was to sort of from pre-production?
I would say the length of time from the time we started to the...
So, okay, so you guys go into the studio with Phil. How is it set up? What's the process of actually recording? Are you guys all in one room? Is it as if you're on stage? Are you all looking at each other? Or is it like, overdub this, overdub that in separate rooms?
Well, this was in a studio that no longer exists. It's A&R Studios, and there were two of them. There was one all the way on the west side in Hell's Kitchen, and then there was the large studio on 52nd Street. And that's where we did a lot of the recording, the basic tracks in the big studio on 52nd Street. We came in as a rhythm section, like I said, bass, drums, piano, and set up the drums in a booth so there wouldn't be a lot of leakage, because leakage is when one instrument is heard through another instrument's microphones. So I'd have the piano set up and covered up with blankets, but there would be microphones inside, underneath the blankets. And the drums would have their microphones around them, and the bass player would have his amplifier in another booth with microphones. But we tried to isolate it so there's not a lot of leakage. But because of the nature of how we play, my drummer played very loud. I sang at the same time I played the piano, so my vocal leaked into the piano, so you really couldn't get all the isolation. And in a way, that created its own sound. The sound of a vocal inside the piano, going through the piano mics, the drums coming in through the blankets into the piano mics and into the vocal mic, all made for a kind of organic sound. It was not high-tech, not a high-tech way to do things. Most of the times, a rhythm section will play on a recording a basic track without the singer. And then the singer comes in later and does the vocal. Well, I don't like to do that. I like to sing at the same time that I play, because I play differently when I'm singing, and I sing differently when I'm playing. And that's what we do. It's as live as you can get. And that's what we were going for. So that's how the original type of recording started for The Stranger.
So everything on the record we hear is a take, one take. It's not spliced and diced or...
There are some spliced sections, but they're not basic tracks. There are some solos, like Phil Wood's saxophone solo on Just the Way You Are is a combination of about 6 solos. He came in and overdubbed the piano solo for Just the Way You Are, and Phil would be listening to him going, I like this part of that solo, I like that part of this solo, and spliced them all together. And these are the days when you had to do it with a razor blade and tape. And we would watch him cut the tape, and we go, you sure you got it right? He goes, yeah, don't worry about it, I know what I'm doing. And he did know what he was doing. And when you listen to that sax solo, it sounds like organically one sax solo, like it was all played in one shot. But he actually smoothed it so it all sounded like it was done at one moment. And it wasn't. It was done at 6 different times. So that's where editing happened on the album, but not on basic tracks. Basic tracks, we pretty much played a song like Scenes from an Italian Restaurant from beginning to end. We didn't do it in sections and then jam it together afterwards. It was all done from beginning, so we had to have it really well choreographed, and we had to really have it rehearsed.
No, you guys are ridiculously tight. When you're, do you happen to remember like the order in which you attacked these things, or how they came about, or is the way in which you recorded the record, or what was done first and what was done last, maybe something like that?
Well, I think we started with the songs we already had that I had already written, like Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. I partially had She's Always a Woman written. Everybody Has a Dream had been written prior to that. I'm trying to think what else. Just the Way You Are, I think, had been written prior to that. I don't remember in what order we recorded. No, I don't really remember that. But I do remember that after I wrote the song "The Stranger," which I think I wrote before we went into the studio too. That might have been another one that I wrote beforehand. That we decided that should be where it is in the album because I wrote a little preface to "The Stranger." There's a little introduction to it, which is that whistling piano thing, which became the theme to "The Stranger." Because after we recorded the song "The Stranger," we sat around and went, I remember me thinking this, it needs some sort of introduction. It needs a prelude. It needs a theme before I go into the song, and then it should slam into the song. And then I came up with the whistling and the piano theme. Actually, this is how that happened. I played the theme on the piano to show Phil, this is this idea for a theme I have for "The Stranger." And then I said, now an instrument should do this. And then I finished it, and I said, so what instrument do you think should do that, Phil? And Phil said, you just did it. And I hadn't even thought about it being whistled, but then I heard it play back, and I went, oh, that's kind of cool, I like that. So that's how this kind of thing happened.
And then that comes back not only at the end of that song, but then at the end of the record.
Yeah, it's what they call symphonic reiteration. We realized that that really was the theme to the album because it was born in the studio during the process. And that just kind of captured the mood.
And were these collection of songs meant to be some sort of a concept thing piece all the way through, or is it just
not at the beginning?
These are the 9 songs I had.
It wasn't initially, a concept album. It wasn't. I didn't conceive it like that. I just had some songs. In the studio, I began to sense that there was a thread, that there was a connection to all the songs. Like the songs that got written in the studio were connected to the songs that had been written prior to that. And the concept evolved naturally as part of the recording process. But before I went in, I didn't say, I'm going to make a concept album. No, it just ended up that way.
One theme that sort of that I find on this record more than some of your others is sort of like an Italian New York City thing. Not only the Italian restaurant, but Mama Leone and
Moving Out,
Catholic Girls, and all that stuff. It's just sort of a. Was that something that was interesting to you, or
I don't know if it was necessarily Italian. I mean, everybody in New York City eats Italian food and knows Italian friends, and I think to this day, some people still think I'm Italian. I never said I was Italian. It's just part of the fabric of life in New York. There's Italian restaurants, and there's Italians, and there's these guys and wise guys, and this particular style of dress. But I think it was more of a New York combination of experiences. That probably was one of the themes running through it.
The cover and that whole shoot with the mask and the boxing gloves and all that, was that something that was your idea, or did that come from somewhere else?
I'm trying to remember that photo shoot. Jim, what was his name?
Jim Houghton.
Jim Houghton was the photographer. And they had a couple of props. I had this idea of being in a bed with something that was strange. I remember they had a kabuki mask. And I said, it looks too much like a kabuki mask. I've got to de-Asiatic this thing somehow. So I put these round pieces of paper on the eyes to make it look less like a kabuki mask and more just like a mask from the Carnival of Venice or something. And they wanted me to hold it. There's different photos. There's outtakes that show with the mask on a stick, and I'm sitting on the side of the bed, and I'm standing over here with the boxing gloves over my shoulder. And it just felt like I should be wearing a suit, a kind of a nice suit, in the bed with no shoes on, with this strange face next to me on the pillow. And the boxing gloves, I don't remember why we did that. That was just sort of a reference to a past life, I guess.
Because that was something you had done.
Yeah.
A long time.
And it was all very symbolic, I suppose. I don't remember exactly what I was thinking at the time. I was, different a different temperament then.
And speaking of the kabuki mask, it seems like from seeing some interviews for the Turnstiles record, that sort of was a big hit in Australia. And then The Stranger sort of became a big thing in Japan. Could you sort of sense that this was becoming like a world thing rather than a U.S., could you feel yourself that people all over the world were now all of a sudden interested in you?
Well, we had toured Australia before The Stranger came out, so we didn't necessarily think, okay, now we're going to explode worldwide. Like I said, we had been building in different areas, different cities, different regions of the country. Australia, I'm not aware that Japan knew about me before the Stranger album, but it was instantly accepted in Japan. It was a hit there right away, and in Australia, and in the States. So we had spent a lot of years developing most of these places, and now I don't want to say it was a surprise. The fact that the record was as big a hit as it was a surprise, but the fact that we went to the next level wasn't so much of a surprise because that had been happening all along, just a lot more gradually.
Was that a goal for you? Was it like, all right, now we've done New York, then we did the States, then we did this, then we did? Was it sort of a broadening, or were you just like, cool, they like it?
I wanted to have my music heard wherever it could be heard. I wanted people to hear it. I didn't necessarily set out to be a big, worldwide, international, super rock star kind of guy. I set out to make a living as a musician, and this is the way it happened. This is the way it developed. But it wasn't a goal to get to the next big level, the next level of big.
So you didn't like doing television appearances?
I've never liked doing television appearances.
Do you recall doing Saturday Night Live in
Yes.
February of that year?
Yes.
Anything? Actually, you get introduced by Chevy Chase, who I think was coming back as a host, and he said in his introduction he says that you were missing your 10-year high school reunion at that point.
Right. That was the night I was supposed to go to my 10th year high school reunion, and we were playing Saturday Night Live. Actually, I didn't mind doing Saturday Night Live because of all the television shows that presented music, they had the best sound equipment. And everybody knew that. And that was the reputation. And it even sounded good on TV. So we weren't all that acrimonious about doing Saturday Night Live. But I do remember right before we started to play, Chevy Chase got into a fight with Bill Murray. Chevy Chase had come back at the guest host, and some kind of tension happened backstage where everybody was bugged. No matter what sketch, they'd walk off. If Chevy was in the sketch, people were walking off, that son of a, there was so much. And there was, right before we're going to go on, we hear this huge argument going on, and we're thinking, oh, those Saturday Night Live people, they're always joking around. Well, they weren't joking around. They were going to swing. Bill Murray took a swing at Chevy, and John Belushi jumped in the middle and actually got the punch. And he wasn't even fighting with Bill Murray. The punch was meant for Chevy, and John tried to break it up, and he got hit. And we thought, oh, wow, okay, 3, 2, 1, you're on. And that's how we went on, right after that.
Are there any other moments from touring during that time period that stand out to you, or was it just sort of like show? Do you have any other big shows or important shows?
77 into 78. Boy, we did a lot of touring. That's one of those times when we'd be on the road 6 months at a stretch, 9 months at a stretch, without going home, because we lived on the road at that particular time in the 70s. You know what? It's kind of all a blur unless you can point out a particular.
Well, do you remember? The record comes out in November. December, you actually are the headliner at Nassau Coliseum on Long Island. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember playing at the Nassau Coliseum. Yeah, I think that might have been our first. No, I think the Garden might have been. Well, they were right about the same time. I remember doing the Coliseum and the Garden during that tour. And those were our first headlining gigs at arenas. Yeah, that was a thrill. We didn't think we'd be able to pull it off. We were scared. Because prior to that, anytime we played arenas, we were the opening act and there wasn't a whole lot at stake. There weren't a lot of expectations of us. Now we were the headliner. And we thought, how are we going to play in these huge hockey arenas? But we adapted. And we learned how to do it. And, it can be done.
Was that in particular big, the Nassau Coliseum, being on Long Island? Did all the friends and family come out of the woodwork?
Oh, yeah. Oh, the whole backstage thing. It was fun to do, but I have to tell you, local gigs can really be a pain in the ass because everybody you ever knew your whole life shows up and they all want to hang out backstage. And you're trying to do a job, you got to work. Even though it's your hometown, you want to do a good show. And there's a lot of peripheral pain in the ass stuff going on. But I remember that gig, yep, now that you reminded me.
Speaking of local gigs, you're going to do these Shea Stadium shows coming up here. Does that hold any significance for you both as a local guy and, sort of in your career?
Oh, yeah. I remember when Shea Stadium opened. It was during the World's Fair of 62 to 64. It brought National League Baseball back to New York. Because I originally was a Brooklyn Dodger fan, and when the Dodgers left at 56, I think it was, that broke my heart. I felt betrayed. Then the Giants left the Bronx, so there was no National League Baseball in New York. I switched to the Yankees because they were the only team we had. So when the Mets came back, they brought National League Baseball to New York City. And there's a lot of humor about the early Mets because they were this bumbling team, kind of like the Dodgers were. They're like the bums. And the World's Fair was a fascinating place when you were a kid. It wasn't all that expensive. You could go on the General Motors ride and the Ford exhibit, and you could spend a day at the World's Fair. And there was Shea Stadium. There it was. It's now become iconic, and now they're going to tear it down. So I have a lot of historical memories that are involved with Shea Stadium. That whole era. The Beatles were the first band to play at a stadium. Who would go to a stadium to see a band play until the Beatles? And they brought the house down. Of course, I don't know if they heard themselves. I don't even know if the audience heard them. Everybody was just so excited that the Beatles were there. Hopefully technology has improved somewhat. Maybe we'll sound a little better than that. Although that was a great band. So, yeah, Shea Stadium is a big deal. Absolutely.
Did you go to the Beatles show as a kid?
I couldn't get tickets. I didn't have any pull back then. I didn't know anybody. I'm surprised people actually got into Carnegie Hall. I heard it was all rich people that went to that one. But Shea Stadium was just packed out, sold out, pretty fast, and it was an exciting time. Yeah.
Do you have any memories of when you did the big Yankee Stadium show?
Oh yeah, Yankee Stadium was a whole jump in level of things. I don't think we had headlined stadiums before that. I've since done stadiums with Elton John and on our own, but that I think was our first major stadium gig, and no one had really played Yankee Stadium before us. I think the Isley Brothers might have done some kind of a show at Yankee Stadium. I don't know whether it was a halftime show during a Yankee game or something, but we were, I think, the first major headline act to sell, a concert in Yankee Stadium on our own. And it was really, really exciting. This is in the house that Ruth built. And we're walking around looking at the monuments to these legends, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, and there you are, you're playing there. They're coming to see you, not the Yankees. So it was huge. It was just the hugeness of it all was staggering. I remember that. Looking out on this sea of people, thinking, what are they all doing here? This is like, it was so out of proportion, but in a way that was kind of cool. That was one of the cool things about it. It was like, this is insane, which made it fun.
Were you still a Yankee fan at that point? Because they went so hot at that time period.
When was that, 89, 90, 91? I'm a baseball fan. People don't seem to be able to understand that. They go, you got to be a Yankee fan, you got to be a Met fan. I just like a good game anymore. I'm not a rabid, radical nut fan. I hate this team and I only want this team to win. I just want a good game. And if the Yankees were playing well, great, I enjoyed that. If the Mets were playing well, I enjoyed that too. I'm a New York fan. And people think I'm dodging who I am really a fan of. I am not. I've always been a New York fan, and I like when New York teams do well. Now, the dilemma for me is when the Yankees play the Mets. I can't lose, all right? So that's how I am.
Okay. I'd like to go through the songs on the record, if that's cool, and just sort of talk about them individually.
Okay.
So the first, obviously, Moving Out, the first track, was the sentiment of that song of your reaction to some, the conditions of, living in Manhattan at the time, or
Well, I'm not really comfortable like deconstructing
Okay.
what the song is about. The song should really speak for itself. I mean, we can talk about the recording of it, or we can talk about the music aspect. But lyrically, I'm not comfortable doing that.
Okay.
Not to give you a hard time. It's just,
Oh, hey.
I never understood why writers did that. Well, I read it. I got it. Well, what are you explaining it for? This will shorten up the time too.
Yeah. Was it your idea to do that the staccato vocal thing? The heart attack, was that your?
Yeah, I actually wanted an echo machine to do that instead of me doing it. And I was trying to explain to Phil, I said, hey, what could do, I can give you a heart attack. And I just saying to Phil, and it should go, ack, 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 ack. And he goes, why don't you just do it? Because it's going to take, 4 hours for us to get the exact kind of the sequencing on it. So I did. And things like this happen, like the whistling, staying in as the Stranger theme, the ack, 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 trying to explain what I was looking for, and Phil said, you just did it. So that's how that happened.
And at the end of the song, there's sort of that car, motorcycle sound effect.
That was Doug Stegmeyer's Corvette. We wanted some kind of the sound of a car peeling out. And Doug Stegmeyer at the time had a Corvette. It was like a 60s era Corvette. And he took his little tape machine in the car with him and hung the microphone over the rear end of the car, and then was burning rubber and doing, screeching away from his house. And that's where that sound came from. That's Doug's vet doing that.
And then that leads into sort of that Laila sort of section at the end.
Right.
That sort of, and to me, that always just sort of, the studio version just sort of fades out right as that starts to get going. Was that originally supposed to be a lot longer?
We went on and on and on. They faded it out, but that ending went on for as long as the Laila section. Yeah, it just went on and on. We were just having too much fun playing. We couldn't stop. And we'd look at Phil, and he'd just go, "Nah, just keep going. Who knows how much of this we're going to use? Just go with it."
Did it bum you out that the final version had to be a certain length?
Yeah, but it always bums me out when they have to edit something. But I think sometimes things do need editing because you can be self-indulgent too. And even though you like it, other people can start to get tired of it. But you need to edit. The education of self-editing is a good process to learn. Because you got to learn when enough is enough, and not be excessive.
Okay. The Stranger, we talked about the whistling part and the
moving out.
Just the Way You Are. Did you write that on the Fender Rhodes that you hear, or was that originally something else and then it turned into?
I dreamt the song. I dreamt the melody, not the words. I had a dream, and then I remember waking up in the middle of the night going, this is a great idea for a song, and going back to sleep, and waking up and not remembering what I dreamt, and knowing, what was that? I had a really good idea, and then I forgot. And a couple of weeks later, I'm in a business meeting, talking to accountants or lawyers, it's some kind of boring stuff, and the dream reoccurs to me right at that moment because my mind drifted off. I'm hearing numbers and legal jargon, and I just drifted up, and boom, it came right back into my head, and I said, I have to go right now. I think I have an idea for a song. So the accountants and lawyers went, well, go. Yeah, go. And I ran home, and I started playing the theme that had reoccurred, and On my way home, I was thinking, okay, how am I going to remember this? Da 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 da. Don't be crazy, don't be stupid. And they're called bailout lyrics, but you have to use them to remember the notes, to remember the theme you sang, that you came up with. So I got home and I ended up writing it all in one sitting, pretty much. About it took me maybe about, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours to write the lyrics. I probably reshaped them a little bit in the studio. But yeah, I remember writing that very well. It was a dream that reoccurred, which happens a lot with me.
And was there anything that, in particular, that Phil brought to that song, or was that just sort of?
We had some difficulty finding what the drum pattern should be. I remember Liberty started playing it as a cha-cha, and we hated that. Go to 1 2 cha 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 to try and play 1 2 cha cha cha. We just, we hate that. I remember Liberty throwing his sticks. I don't want to be a cocktail lounge drummer. And we said, we don't want you to either. And Phil came up with that pattern that goes boom, that, boom, cha, boom, bop. Sort of a backwards Latin samba thing, which we wouldn't even have considered playing unless Phil came up with it. And so that was that part of it. And then the vocals, there's this atmospheric thing going on. Don't go, ah, all these voices singing ah, which is very similar to 10cc's record, You're Not in Love, ah, don't it textures the background. I didn't want to use an organ as a sostenuto, as a sustain. I didn't want violins doing it. I didn't want a horn section doing it. So what's going to give us that fill in the back? Well, I came up with this idea, because now you can do it with the synthesizer. You can just hit voice button and then play voices singing and hold it as long as you want. We didn't have that technology in '77. I actually had to sing each note and hold it, and then they'd make a tape loop, then I'd sing the next note, they'd make a tape loop of that, and then we had it on the board. This is kind of difficult to understand how this is all working. But Phil had the note of me singing the note, ah, and would bring it in and bring it back out, as if he was playing the organ. And that was a relatively new technique. I don't know how 10cc did it, but that's how we did it.
But that's all you doing all those parts?
That was all me doing all those voices. And the other thing with that song was bringing Phil Woods in to do the sax solo. Now, our sax player at the time was a guy named Richie Canada, and he had been used to playing all the sax parts. But Phil said, look, I've got a specific guy. He was a protege of Charlie Parker. Now, how do you not go along with that? Go, wow. And Richie was disappointed. But I was dying to hear, Charlie Parker's protege, Phil Woods. I mean, this guy's just a legend. And he came in and just blew the hell out of the thing. And like I said, played 6 solos. I didn't know which one to pick, but Phil did. Phil knew that he liked sections of each one and edited them all together into one solo. So there was a lot going on with that recording that was novel to us, that was new for us, that got created in the studio at that particular moment. And then at the end of things, we were sitting around, we got a bunch of guys here. There was no girl in the band. It was just all guys. And we're listening back going, I don't know, do you like it? I don't know, it's a chick song. None of us were all that hot to put it on the album. And then we were listening back again, and Phoebe Snow came by with Linda Ronstadt, and they heard the song, and they went, we love that song. We said, yeah, we don't like it. We're not sure we're going to put it on the album. And they said, you're crazy. You've got to put that song on the album. We said, yeah, all right. These girls like the song. I guess we should put it on the album. So we kept it on, thanks to them.
So did it surprise you when that sort of became the standout Grammy-winning track off of the record?
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't even a rock and roll record. It was like a standard kind of song, or with a little bit of R&B in it. It reminded me of an old Stevie Wonder recording, in a way, a song that Stevie might have written, who I loved. I loved Stevie Wonder. But yeah, it surprised the hell out of me. I didn't think it was going to win anything.
Italian Restaurant. So you already said that was several smaller songs before that.
Right.
Was this, was it something that just naturally occurred to you to put these songs together, or was it like, did it take a long time to figure out how to do that?
Well, I had always admired the B side of the album Abbey Road, which was essentially a bunch of individual songs that were strung together by George Martin. I think what happened was the Beatles came in and they didn't have completely finished songs or wholly fleshed out ideas, and George said, "What do you got?" John said, "Well, I got this," and Paul said, "Well, I got that." And they all sat around and went, well, we can put this together with that. That'll fit in there. And that's pretty much what I did with Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. I had this initial ballad of Brenda and Eddie. So this was about the high school prom, king and queen, sweethearts who break up and they go on with their lives. And I said, okay, well, that's not the whole story. We have to get to them. You can't can't just be there. There has to be some kind of time sequence. So I started with the premise of a bottle of red, a bottle of white, set up a scene where there's people sitting in an Italian restaurant starting to talk about the old days. And then the second section of that is when the sax comes in, which is supposed to represent a time change. And Mike Myers would go, which is that what's supposed to be, January, February, 1975, 1972, 1971, going back in time. And that seemed like the natural place to go with an instrumental piece. Let's have something that refers to a change of time. And then I put it into this this place where it's things are okay with me these days. Remember those days hanging out at the Village Green. He starts referring back to the past, and then it goes into the ballad of Brenda and Eddie from there. So we realized this is kind of like trying to recreate side B of Abbey Road, except not as long, just in a shorter version. Not that I'm saying we would ever think that we could do something as good as that, but we knew what the technique was, and that's what it was.
Okay. Is there when you state the bottle of red, bottle of white theme, is there a reason why you drop the beat when you play it on the piano rather than when you sing it?
You mean the way I'm phrasing the piano part? Just seems like the right thing to do. I don't think it's an intellectual decision. I think it's just a natural musical move that seemed right.
Always occurred to me.
I let the fingers do the walking a lot. I don't tell them what to do. They seem to do all right on their own. Yeah. The minute you start thinking, you're dead. You can't think when you're playing. You just got to feel it.
Vienna, you said that was one that you wrote sort of as you were going in response to something else.
Yeah, Vienna is just kind of this bastard child that appeared out of nowhere. Popped out, and I just wrote it, and I said, this fits the mood of this album. Didn't even really know at the time why I wrote it. It just, boom, popped out, and the band liked it, and I liked it.
Okay, we're on. She's Always a Woman. This, to me, seems like the sort of least amount of production of any song on the record. It's very sort of sparse. Was that on purpose, or was it just sort of like, it's perfect the way it is?
I believe that when I first wrote the song, I heard it as a folk song. And I'm not really a folk artist. Piano players don't necessarily play, acoustic guitar style folk music, which in a way accounts for the piano technique. I was trying to play like a guitar would pick. And it was supposed to be pretty pure as a folk song, and it didn't really change.
There's a bit at the end that reminds me of the story that John Lennon used to tell of You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, where at the end of the song there's that instrumental bit, and everyone everyone thought that he should play the harmonica at the end. And he said, well, no, that would be too obvious because that's what Dylan would do or whatever. It's a folk thing. So they had flutes come in and play at the end of the track.
Right.
Was there, at the end of this song, you sort of hum the theme again?
Right.
Was there, in a similar way, because it's a waltz, was there well, I shouldn't use the harmonica because that's the piano man thing. Was there any kind of or was that, again, like the whistling, like a placeholder and we'll do something else, or?
Well, there's a lot of dichotomy in the song itself. I think if it was done too sweet and too pure, it wouldn't have worked. You know, the lyric is somewhat troubling. You know, some people said, oh, he's a misogynist. You know, look what he says about this woman. And he wrote this song called She's Only a Woman, which always cracks me up every time I read that. I said, well, that's what you call it. That's not what I call it. To me, it's a very simple, understandable lyric. She may be that to you, but she's this to me. You know, so what's your problem? But I wanted to hum as if I was being meditative. Because humming to me always is a metaphor for I'm thinking about this. This is how I think right now. Yeah.
So you weren't like, oh, that could be some other instrument later on, and I'll just put this in.
You know what? That might have happened, and again, it might have been one of those things where I said, something should do something here. And Phil went, you just did it. That's it. That's the right sound. Because when I was at a loss, Phil would know. And I might have just been doing it instinctively the right way without knowing it was right.
And was it the fact that it was a waltz sort of similar to...
Well, it's not a waltz. It's 6/8 time. A waltz is 3/4 time. Yeah. So it was more of a continuum than a waltz. Like a waltz is da-na, 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 da-da, and this was dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. It's tied together. Dee-dee-dee-dee. That makes it 6/8. I think. I may be wrong.
Get It Right the First Time. That's like a sort of a funky, like, you know, with like it's got sort of a wah bass thing going on, and the drums and the piano and stuff. It was almost like a weather report type thing. Was that at all something you were thinking about?
I don't know how we came up with that one. That's almost got a faux disco beat to it. Dun 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 woo dun dun. I don't know where that one came from. I don't know what to tell you about that song. I don't know why I wrote it. I don't know how I wrote it. I don't know where it came from. I don't think we've ever done it live. I guess it just fit on the album. It just seemed to work. You listen to the album and it's tired and you go, yeah, okay. But I don't remember much about that at all.
Was it a case of, well, we already have this kind of song, this kind of song, this kind of song. We just need something that sounds totally different than all of that?
I think it maybe was just written as a relief to, you know, the strength of other things. It was sort of a lighthearted moment. We thought we needed to just have a little breath, which is really, that's all it is. It's just breathing.
Okay. And then the last song on the record, Everybody Has a Dream, obviously very, was it written as sort of a church type song, like a very gospel thing? Did you have that in mind?
That was actually written a long time prior to the Stranger album. It was written the same time